Hello, everybody, and welcome. I am so excited to have you all here today. I am Allison Cooper, owner of Influencer Secrets Academy, and I am here today with Jaime Bell, our lawyer, and she's also the owner of Contracts Market, which she's going to tell you a little bit more about. I am so excited to dive into a little contracting 101 so that you guys can walk away from this and learn some basics about what you need to make sure you're watching out for to protect yourself when you're signing all of these brand partnership agreements. So, Jaime, please, let's first welcome you. I'm so excited you're here. Share a little bit about yourself and take it away.
Thank you so much, Allison. Yeah, my name's Jaime. I'm a business lawyer, founder of the Contracts Market that provides legal contract templates to freelancers, influencers, service providers, coaches, really anybody who's operating in the gig economy or e-com space these days. I am based in Canada, but all my agreements and templates have been reviewed by US lawyers. So no matter where you are in US or Canada, they'll cover you. So I'm really excited to dive into today's topic because I feel like there's such a rise in micro and nano influencer marketing, and there's big opportunity out there. So I'm glad that you're all listening in.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So let's jump in. Our first question here is, what key terms should we all be looking for in a brand deal contract to protect ourselves? Because as we find, most of these contracts really are protecting the brand.
Totally. Yeah. So I guess just right off the hop, it doesn't matter like if you have 1 follower or 10 million, you should definitely be using a contract to paper these deals. I'm of the opinion that anytime there's an exchange of value between you and someone else, especially when you're dealing with brands, there should be a written agreement between you. So even if you're not getting paid for the deal, if it's exchange of product or, exposure, which we hate, and no doesn't pay the bills, there should be an agreement there. So a few of the big items that should be covered in your contract with a brand is the scope of work. What exactly are you expected to create as a result of them compensating you for your time? So what are the deliverables? What do those look like? And getting really specific, I see a lot of friction come up because, a brand says create XYZ and their expectation doesn't meet yours. 3 stories. Well, is it 30-second stories or 1-minute stories, or is it a 15-second reel, or now the reels can be up to 3 minutes or God longer.
Yeah.
So just getting really clear on those deliverables, because those are the friction points. And then what is the timeline here? So being really clear, if they have a campaign coming up, what is their last minute deadline for you to get your work in so that your work is being delivered for their campaign? So those are things that definitely cause friction. Payment terms. This is a big one. I know we'll probably dive into getting paid, ensuring you get paid a little later on, but what is the amount? What exactly are you getting paid? Are you getting paid a combination of product and money, just money? Are you expected to return product? I don't see that very often, but you just never know what the expectation is, especially if it's a brand's first time working with a content creator. Are there conditions attached to getting paid? Like, do you get a deposit or a retainer up front before you start the work, and then you only get paid after they approve your work? What do those approvals look like? You just never know. I'm a big fan of getting money before I start work, especially because often you're dealing with pretty wild westy marketing departments who all of a sudden have a change of plan, and all of a sudden your content doesn't fit in to their campaign anymore or their plan, and now you've spent all this time creating content, maybe saying no to other brands, depending on what's in the contract. And you just want to make sure that you are not starting work until you get paid, if at all possible. And I can also appreciate that probably a lot of the people that are listening to this are either early on in their content creation influencer journey, or are really far along, but are still in the micro nano influencer stage.
Mm-hmm.
And it also, all these things that we're talking about today do come down to how much leverage you have with the brand. So you might not get them all. So it's good to try and make a list of non-negotiables for yourself and really think, okay, I'm going to pitch this to the brand. They might say no, no, no on this, but if I get a yes on this one, then I'm okay to proceed. And then we'll try better. We'll try a little harder and ask a little differently on the next one. So that's just my, take this all with a bit of a grain of salt. Another big one that I always am cautious about with influencers, actually two in particular, usage rights. So knowing exactly how and where your content will be used. Is it just going to be organic posts on their social media feeds? Or can they use your content for ads for bigger reach? Can they put ad spend behind you? Can they put your face on a billboard if they decide to go, old school billboard marketing? Can they use your content on their website where it lives indefinitely? Really understanding the usage rights that you're giving and the ownership of that content, who owns the content after you deliver it. In the US, there's a concept called work for hire, which means that you're hired and you create the content and you give ownership to, in this case, the brand. So really understanding if that's the case. Once you create that piece of content, do you own it still? Are you just giving a license to the brand to use it and you can continue to use it? Or are you handing over that piece of content in full to the brand and they can do with it what they like? So really understanding the ownership piece. And then I don't want to get overwhelming because this can be a lot. You might have to listen to this twice, but exclusivity. This is a big one brands are asking for. And you want to be very certain that what you are agreeing to in your contract is not handcuffing you and limiting how you can earn an income down the road. So when it comes to exclusivity, that means you will not create content for a similar brand or at all. I've seen pretty sweeping ones. So if you're a beauty influencer and you're being hired by a skincare brand, you don't want them to say you can't do any other kind of health and wellness influencing content at all. That's going to handcuff you. But you might say, hey, for the next 3 months, I won't enter into a brand deal with someone with a competing product, and then get as specific about that as you can. So, I don't use them, but like CeraVe, for instance, maybe you're doing like a foamy soap, face wash. Maybe your exclusivity says, hey, I won't enter into a brand deal and do content with anybody else for a foaming cleanser, something like that. So you don't want to handcuff yourself to, gain momentum by getting brand deals. And then all of a sudden you have one contract where you were paid $300 that says you can't do anything in the skincare industry anymore. Like, that just doesn't make sense. So being really clear about these things. And when you get your contract, make sure you're actually reading it. And if you don't understand it, get someone to help you interpret it.
I love that response. I hope everybody was taking notes because Jamie, you covered so much. The only one thing that I would add is making sure you're really clear about the rounds of edits, because I've been in situations where sometimes brands will just be like, well, fix this, fix that. And you're like, wait, no. I cannot be going back and forth about all of these edits. It gets a little crazy.
Well, and I think that leads really nicely into like how you're ensuring you're protecting your creative freedom while also meeting the brand's requirements. Because if you create a piece of if somebody's hiring you, first of all, they obviously respect the community that you've created, the vibe you've created online, and the content you are creating. So right out of the gate, you have leverage because they're approaching you, or you've approached them and they've agreed. So rather than when you're going through like understanding the types of content they want you to create, make sure you're just asking for guidelines. Like, you really don't want them being like, hey, read this real script and say it verbatim, because not only are you, restricting yourself in your own creative freedom, it's probably not what your community is expecting from you. And if you're expected to post the content you're creating for the brand within your own community, you better make sure it jives with what else you're doing. Like, we all know those ads that come out of nowhere from the people that we follow for a reason, and we're like, this just doesn't fit. So make sure that you're really looking at like, what are the parameters that I need to create this content in, and do I have the freedom within those parameters to make something that feels good with my own community?
Yeah, I love that. That's a really, really, really great answer. So next, let's dive into our big red flags, right? What are the things that as an influencer we need to say, to look at and say, hold on, like, I got to rethink?
Yeah, payment. Mama's got to eat, or,
yeah, right. That's right.
So, like, unclear payment terms, any kind of payment term that says you only get paid after we give final approval on the content and use the content, like, nope.
Yeah.
Like, you need to make sure that you are creating cash flow in your business. And that often means having a deposit up front and then a milestone for delivery. So, you sign the contract and say, I want 30%, maybe if you're just starting out. Retainer at the beginning, non-refundable. Like, when I start content creation, I don't care if your campaign is changing and you don't use my content anymore. And then get paid before you send that final deliverable, if possible. Sign off and then, hey, yeah, you can use it once you've paid me. But this also comes down to really understanding and building a relationship with the brand. Maybe the first time they hire you, you can only get 30% up front, and then the rest when you send over the final deliverable. But maybe on the next one, you can say, hey, I want 50% up, 50% at the beginning. And this makes sure that, like, as I'm negotiating other brand deals, yours remains priority, because as you're growing in this space, you're going to be in more and more in demand. So just really understanding the payment terms. Don't agree to net 60 or net 90 or any of these things. Like, if you can avoid it, again, it comes back to leverage, but really negotiate and stand up for yourself when it comes to getting paid, and follow up. Like, the squeaky wheel gets the oil.
That's
So
right.
if you find yourself in a situation where you're not getting paid, like, follow up.
Absolutely.
I feel like that's the biggest thing. I often get people, not just influencers, of course, but clients, like, hey, I haven't got paid by my client. Like, when did you ask them? Like, well, I didn't. The contract just says to pay. I'm like, follow up. It might not even be they're avoiding you. They just forgot.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. The other one. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, one thing that I found when I started working for an agency is that their payment systems they can sometimes take 60 days before the system like even lets the vendor in. So when you're following up and there's stuff going on, like, that's the kind of thing that's going on behind the scenes. So it's make sure that you get your information to the brand right up front at the very beginning, because it can take time to get you into their payment system.
Absolutely. And those are good questions to ask, because even if it's your first deal, if you come prepared with questions like, okay, how long does it take to onboard me and get like me into your system and get paid? And what are the usage rights? And there's this exclusivity clause I don't feel comfortable with. Those are all things, like, just because they're your first brand, they don't need to know that. Come prepared and be professional. This is a job. I think there's a lot of people who are like, I'm just so flattered they want to work with me. I'm like, no, you've obviously shown you're really good at what you're doing, and they value your content out of everybody else's. So treat it that way. You don't ever have no leverage.
That's right. Don't ever forget that. This is
a
Go
few
ahead.
other red flags. I'm just gonna
Yeah.
go.
Okay.
I have
Yeah.
a couple like other red
Keep 'em
flags.
coming.
Like perpetual usage rights.
Mm,
So that means that they can just keep using your content forever and they're paying you so low for it. Maybe you say you can use it for next 6 months, and if it's performing really well, there's an additional fee or something like that.
mhm.
You can probably speak to that a little bit more than me,
No,
but you probably see it
absolutely.
in a brand situation.
Yeah, I mean, I personally would never sign anything that said in perpetuity. So just kind of
Yeah,
keep that term right, in the forefront of your brain when you're reading through a contract. There should always be a very specific outlined there.
absolutely. The other one to keep an eye out for, and um, can come up in situations where marketing departments change their mind, is like one-sided termination rights. So if that happens, if you're in the middle of creating content or in the middle of a project and getting your deliverables ready, what happens if the brand says they don't need it anymore?
Mm,
That's why having that retainer up front is a great thing to have. And then even
yeah,
beyond that, say, hey, if like, you can have a sliding scale of payment, or maybe just say, hey, if you terminate, there's a,
see.
40% termination fee or something like that. Again, these are all things that just come with leverage and working with the brand and understanding them. You might not all get them all, but just things that might tweak your mind as you're getting bigger and bigger in your space.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, the last thing is just, again, coming back to like, if the deliverables are really vague and the company has literally no idea what they need, it's a red flag. You need to get really specific about exactly what the expectations are so that you can uphold your side of the bargain.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really, really great tip. So well, I mean, we sort of touched on payment a little bit already, but I would love to dive into sort of payment negotiations a little bit. Should you accept that first offer? Is it okay to push back? That kind of thing.
I mean, this definitely is more of like business
Yeah,
skills, and they're muscles that become easier to flex once you've used them a few times.
absolutely.
But I feel, and you probably know better, there's always a little bit more
Yep.
wiggle room in a deal.
Hmm.
And the default is that people are just so flattered that somebody's asked them to do the deal
Yeah.
that they just accept on the first go. And that doesn't mean you have to be bullish about it, but you don't if you don't feel good about the money you're going to get paid for creating the content, and how much time these things take to make,
Yeah.
the only thing you're going to feel through this whole process is resentment if you don't feel like you're getting paid what you think you should be getting paid. So don't take anything on face value if you don't feel good about it. I mean, there's also deals that come across, you're like, holy shit, this is great. I'm ready
Uh-huh.
to go. So
Absolutely.
like, it doesn't mean like, well, I'm going to put my big girl pants on and like negotiate this. I mean, you can, but like, if it's great and you feel good about it, you don't have to negotiate everything, but there's more often than not, room on the table,
Yeah.
or more on the table. And then maybe it doesn't come down to like how much, but again, coming back to like, when will I get paid? If there's any ability to get paid faster, like if you see net 90, unless there's a really good reason for it, it doesn't 3 months is a long time to wait to get paid for a piece of content. So maybe switch 50% up front
Yeah.
and no final usage you know, um, until you're paid. And there's also like a little bit of urgency in all these things because trends change and what people relate to in content change. And you, I mean, companies need to learn to pay faster. you can you can
Oh
probably speak to that a little bit
yeah.
better. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Agree. So let's go on to sort of how do we protect our rights as an influencer?
Yeah, number one, read your contracts. The amount of times I get messages being like, hey, this was in my contract, but it doesn't seem fair. Am I stuck with it? Well,
Yeah.
like, you signed the contract. So it's not a great excuse. I wish it was, to say, well, the fine print sucked and was boring, so I didn't read it, but I don't want to be stuck with it. Well, you are. So in most cases, so read your contracts. I don't care how excited you are about a brand deal, read your contracts. The bigger the brand, the more it's going to be in their favor. So just remember that. Coming back to content ownership, making sure that you understand and feel good about what happens to your content, who owns it and what they can do with it at the end of the deal. I've heard some horror stories before where, a micro influencer at the time, she's now huge, created a video and the marketing, the brand only paid her till the end of the year. They said, we'll pay you for usage rights up till December 31st. Well, didn't January come along and they licensed it to an airline, and she went on a flight and saw her video on the back of the seat in front of her being played with branded with Visa or something like that. And she's like, I'm not getting paid $1 for this. And it was because she didn't understand the usage rights. So understand what companies can do with your content beyond the term of your agreement. And if you're not feeling good about that, add a clause in there that says, company can use my agreement till December 31st or whatever, or content until December 31st. And then after that, if they want to use it because it's excellent content and it's performing really well, we can renegotiate the next fee to extend the term of this agreement. So just doing things like that to make sure that you are also benefiting from the content performing well and you are getting compensated because you made great content. So I would say that. And then, I work one-on-one through my law firm with a lot of influencers and service providers, and a lot of it is just understanding what you're signing. So even if it doesn't, totally protect your rights, at least you know what you're getting into so you can live with it. Because nothing is worse than, a brand doing something a little shady and it's like, well, they're totally within their rights to do it. It just doesn't feel good. And we should have kind of caught that a little earlier.
Absolutely. Really good. Really good insight. So I feel like, as an influencer, we're signing these contracts and we are always so nervous about okay, well, we want to make sure that we're delivering and we're providing everything on our end. But then what happens on the flip side when the brand actually does breach the contract? What kind of voice do you have? What kind of steps should you take in order to rectify that?
Yeah. Okay. So first hot tip, get out of your DMs when you're negotiating these things. Put it in an email. If a brand reaches out to you and says, hey, I love what you're doing, we want to create content. Great. Send me an email. And because first of all, there's a paper trail. DMs can be on certain platforms deleted. It's hard to screenshot. It sure costs my clients a lot more for me to go through their DMs and read and figure out what was said versus an email change. So document everything. Keep it in an email. It's easier for the brands. It's easier for you. It's better record management. If you're not getting paid after you've sent a follow-up letter on yourself, you've reached out, you've done all the things, get a lawyer to send a demand letter. I think I charge under $400 to send a demand letter, and often that is enough to light a fire. And obviously you want to do a cost benefit analysis here to say hey, is this worth it? They owe me $150. It's exhausting. I'm just going to let it go. Or if the amount's sufficient, get a lawyer involved. If you have documented things and you have a contract, it's pretty easy to say, hey, Allison delivered X amount of deliverables by her deadline date and you haven't paid. You're in breach of contract, lawyer pay up.
Yeah.
And then it just depends on your jurisdiction, which means where you live, but you might be able to start a small claims action against somebody if you find, again, after cost benefit analysis of this whole thing, that that's a road you want to take. And for most small claims, you don't need a lawyer. You can totally navigate it yourself. I know here in British Columbia, Canada, we have a totally virtual mediation option for anything under 5,000, I think it is. So that's a great option because it's all done virtually. It's a clear process and then they get a judgment. So there are other options than just, an expensive lawsuit. But if the amount's sufficient, it doesn't hurt to have a lawyer on your team to help you out.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right, we are going to jump to FTC disclosures. This is
My
a
favorite.
big one because there were just some changes that happened with this back in October. And should we be adding any additional clauses to our contracts in order to protect us when it comes to FTC disclosures?
Yeah, so in case anybody's not familiar with the FTC, it's the Federal Trade Commission, which is like the police of online marketing. And it is not enough to say I'm a small person now, I won't get flagged. They are on a witch hunt right now.
Yep.
So it is best practice to understand what the FTC online marketing laws are. I've got quite a bit of content about this on my page. But basically what the FTC wants to see is honest, truthful, and non-deceptive marketing practices. So big one for influencers is like you actually need to have used the product and be giving an honest review of it when you are promoting it online. Like if you've been taking Sugar Bear hair gummies and you haven't seen a difference, but you're out there saying that your long, luscious locks are the result of Sugar Bear hair gummies, you can't say that anymore.
Yeah.
So you have to be honest about what you are promoting. And that might mean getting sent product from a brand and saying no, because the worst thing that you can do is promote a product to your audience that you don't believe in. You are going to not only be putting yourself at legal risk, but you're putting your whole career at risk, because we can smell bullshit a mile away on the internet these days. And so like we are following you because we trust you.
Yeah.
The moment you breach that trust, you are done. So from a legal perspective, you need to be honest and transparent. And just from like a business perspective, we don't want to follow people who are lying to us just to make a buck on their Amazon shop.
Yeah.
The other thing that's really important from an FTC perspective is to make sure that it is very clear that what you are promoting is a paid sponsorship ad. So that means using sponsor, like paid ad hashtag, or this is a paid ad, and not burying it in hashtag number 29 out of 30 on your post. It has to be clear and evident to the viewer that it is an ad, like you're being paid or you've been given product, or you're being compensated for letting people know about this. So that's a big one. Disclosure, that's what we're calling disclosure. And then just making sure that you, in your contracts, you have like an indemnification clause. This is like getting into legalese a little bit, but just saying that if the brand is making misleading claims and they told you these misleading claims, that you're not liable for it. If they've told you clinical trials, scientific backed up, these hair gummies are going to make your hair grow, and that like that's bullshit, then you want to make sure that you're not liable for that. So that is where like a lawyer could come in and help you make sure that clause is there. But you just want to make sure that the brand's not saying like, hey, you're liable if if people rely on the information we gave you to promote to your community. You want to make sure you're not liable for that.
Absolutely. I just want to say too that speaking of disclosures and things, I specialize in health and wellness, and as on the flip side of the working in influencer marketing. And in these cases with the health and wellness products, most of the brands are sending the influencers content through something called ALR. Every brand has a different name for it, but it's legal review. And if you're working on a health and wellness product, it typically will take 3 to 6 months for it to sit with their legal team before you're able to publish that content. And if you are working with a health and wellness product and they are not doing that, they're skipping this stuff, it's a huge red flag. So just beware of that.
Yeah, that's really good to know.
Yeah.
It's also a great question to show that you know what you're talking about.
Yeah,
when you are going through the negotiation process with the brand.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
And lastly, we're getting through all these questions here. I'm just like, I feel like I'm learning today things too.
Me too. It's great.
Lastly, what happens if a brand asks me to remove or edit a post after a campaign has ended? Do I have to comply? Is it up to my discretion? What do I do in this situation?
Well, removal, you might want to ask why.
Yep.
Because if they're getting sued because their product is terrible, you might want that off your feed.
Yeah.
For those kind of requests, and I mean, it really comes down to like fact by fact situation. I will say though, when it comes to editing posts, I would make sure that your contract has a clause. This would probably be called like an additional services clause or something that says anything that's outside the scope of, once you're paid and you need to go back and spend time on a post, even if it's just making a quick change, like you get paid for that.
Oh, that's a great, great, great addition there. Everybody please take note there because this happens.
Yeah. What do you see? Why I'm curious, like why do brands typically reach out to change?
It's so weird. A lot of times you just don't know.
Yeah.
Sometimes there are just like the weirdest things that are happening internally. And they'll just be like, we want
Yeah.
this taken down.
Or the product's not available anymore and they're getting traffic for nothing. Or
I've worked through Project Motherhood with just, different health brands, or they just kind of like want all removal of links or something like that in a blog post because they'll change how they're doing their SEO or, something that it's always very bizarre things that you would never think of. But,
As somebody who's going through and like updating links in my blog posts on the contracts market right now, I would definitely be charging to like go back and edit them. It is mental math that I'd rather not do. So that I love that clause. That's like one of my favorite clauses I have in my service agreements is additional services. It helps avoid scope creep, all the things. Like it's just like, yeah, sure, happy to do that. Remember, I charge $150 per change or like whatever, whatever your fee is. I just pulled that out.
Love it.
Yeah. $150 an hour, not $150 per change. Like,
yes.
Yeah. Get
I know.
paid.
I need to start adding that. That's a good reminder. I got to add that to my contract. Well, thank you, Jaime, so much for taking the time to be here. You have left us with such a wealth of information. Is there, any huge takeaway you want our influencers to walk away with today?
I think two things. The first is I can, take a deep breath. This kind of stuff can be really overwhelming, and I don't want you to feel like you need to be a lawyer to navigate these deals. What I want this recording to do for you is just like plant a seed in your brain to think about these things as they come up, and it just to act as issue spotting along the way. So if something's like, hey, I heard about this, I'm going to look into this a bit more, then I've done my job, because this can be overwhelming and it's literally just issue spotting. Like, I just want you to know, like, hey, I heard about it. It's in my subconscious somewhere. And the next contract that comes along, maybe use this episode as like a checklist, or it just refreshes something for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the other thing is like, just remember that if somebody's asking you to create content for their brand, they really value what you're creating. So just like, put your shoulders back a little bit and like understand it doesn't matter if you have a really small following, you have leverage. So just try. And the more you try and the more you ask, the more comfortable you'll get doing it. And it's all a learning process. So yeah, just learn and move on.
Yep. You'll get better at it every time.
Totally. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you so much for joining us. I am just so excited for everybody to walk away with all of this information. It's so valuable, and we really appreciate you sharing it all with us.
My pleasure.
Thanks, Jaime. We'll talk soon.
Okay. Thanks, Allison. Bye-bye, everyone.